Get your hands off that Rolls before I call the cops!
It's my car.
Your car? Seriously? No way he owns any of these.
Every single one belongs to me.
Tell them he stole these cars!
Are you absolutely sure you want to do this?
I've never been more sure of anything.
You'll regret this.
Vehicle registration, corporate ownership. My client owns everything you're standing in front of.
Mr. Reeves, I sincerely apologize.
I didn't know.
That's exactly the problem.
Before we continue, subscribe to Racism Story and join thousands discovering stories that challenge prejudice and reveal the truth behind First Impression Next.
Get your hands away from that car before I call security. Sandra Whitmore's voice cut across the valet circle of the Harborview Grand Hotel like a blade through still water. Every conversation on the marble steps stopped. Every head turned. A tall man with dark hair and quiet eyes stood beside a pearl-white Bentley Continental, key fob in his hand, one hand resting gently on the door. He turned slowly. His name was Keanu Reeves. And this is where everything started. Sandra looked him up and down like she was reading a price tag. Jeans, a gray hoodie that had been washed too many times, worn leather boots with a scuff on the left toe. She had made up her mind in under 4 seconds. That car does not belong to you. She said it the way people say things they absolutely believe. Step away right now. His voice was low, even. This is my car, ma'am. She laughed, the kind of laugh that is not really about something being funny. Yours. She looked around at the people behind her, collecting an audience. A man like you does not drive a Bentley to this hotel. You probably took the bus. Step aside before I have you removed. He did not move. He did not raise his voice. I am a guest here. Sandra Whitmore pulled her phone from her blazer pocket. We will see about that, she dialed. Not 911 yet, the hotel's internal security line. 2 men in black uniforms appeared from the lobby doors within 90 seconds, walking fast. And what Sandra Whitmore did not know, what she could not have imagined, was exactly who she was talking to. She did not know what he owned. She did not know what his name meant. She did not know that the ground she was standing on, the chandeliers above her head, the carpet beneath her heels, belonged to him. She was about to find out. Before we get to that moment, let me take you back to the beginning. Let me show you who Keanu Reeves really was. Because the man standing beside that Bentley was not who Sandra Whitmore thought he was. Not even a little. Keanu Reeves grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Tacoma, Washington. His mother, Gloria, cleaned offices downtown 5 nights a week. His father left when Keanu was 9 and never came back. That left Gloria and Keanu and a kitchen table where they ate dinner together every single night, even on the nights when dinner was just toast and canned soup. She never complained. She never let him see her cry. But he heard it sometimes through the wall at 2A. The quiet kind, the kind you swallow so nobody notices. He noticed. He never forgot. He was not the loudest kid in school. He was not the fastest or the most popular. He was the one who stayed late in the library, the one who read business books while other kids played video games. He had a notebook he called his blueprint. He started it when he was 15. On the first page, he wrote one sentence in capital letters. The day is coming when nobody will dupe me again. He attended the University of Washington on a partial scholarship and worked 3 jobs to cover the rest. Weekday mornings, he delivered breakfast sandwiches for a deli near campus. Weekend nights, he parked cars at a hotel downtown. He learned more in that valet job than in any classroom. He learned which guests tipped and which ones did not. He learned the difference between old money and new money. He learned that the quietest people in the lobby were often the most important ones. He stored all of it. By the time Keanu was 31, he had co-founded a hospitality investment company called Meridian Coast Capital. By 36, Meridian Coast had a portfolio that included stakes in 11 hotel properties across the Pacific Northwest, 3 resort developments in Nevada and Arizona, and a growing interest in luxury boutique hotels along the California coast. His personal net worth at the time of this story sat just over $840 million. So he did not advertise this. No Forbes profiles, no Instagram, no press releases, just a website with a single logo and a contact email. He built in the dark and liked it that way. His one visible indulgence was the pearl-white Bentley Continental he had purchased 14 months ago. He chose white because his mother once told him she had never ridden in a white car. The day he bought it, he drove it straight to Tacoma and parked it in front of Gloria's house. He honked once. She came to the door in her housecoat and stood on the porch with her hand over her mouth for a full 30 seconds. That memory alone was worth every dollar the car cost. Now let me tell you about the Harborview Grand Hotel. The Harborview Grand sat on prime waterfront real estate in Portland, Oregon. 18 floors of glass and steel. A rooftop bar that overlooked the Willamette River. A restaurant on the second floor that had held a Michelin star for 3 consecutive years. Guest rooms started at $420 per night and climbed from there. The clientele was wealthy, white, and accustomed to things going exactly as expected. Meridian Coast Capital had acquired a controlling 72% stake in the Harborview Grand 11 months prior. The acquisition was quiet, structured through a series of holding companies that kept Keanu's name off the public-facing documents. He preferred it that way. He had learned early that when people know who you are before they meet you, they treat the idea of you rather than the actual you. He wanted to know who treated strangers with dignity. That told him far more about a person's character than any background check ever could. Sandra Whitmore was the hotel's director of guest experience, 49 years old, brown hair cut sharp at the jaw. A wardrobe that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She had been with the hotel for 7 years, first as a front desk supervisor, then promoted 3 times until she had authority over every guest-facing interaction in the building. She was good at her job, technically. The lobby was always immaculate. The reviews were consistent. The check-in process ran like a machine, but Sandra had a habit, a particular reflex that kicked in when certain guests arrived. It was subtle enough that no one had ever documented it, but the staff all knew. The doorman knew. The housekeeping supervisor knew. Russell, no, his name here is Marcus. Marcus, a 63-year-old valet supervisor, who had worked the hotel's front circle for 11 years, he knew better than anyone. Marcus had watched Sandra redirect certain guests to the side entrance. He had watched her call security on a black family whose cars was nicer than most of the others in the lot. He had watched her make people feel like strangers in a place they had paid to belong to. He had said nothing. Not yet. On the morning of this story, Keanu arrived at the Harborview Grand at 11:14 a.m. He was in Portland for a 2-day property review. He planned to walk the building quietly, observe the operation, eat at the restaurant, talk to no one about who he was. He did this at all his properties once a year. He called it a temperature check. The temperature that morning was about to spike. He gave the Bentley to Marcus at the valet stand. Marcus took the keys with both hands and said, "Good morning, sir," the way a man says things when he has spent a decade making people feel genuinely welcomed. Keanu thanked him, tipped him $40 in cash, and walked toward the lobby entrance. He stopped to check his phone near the glass doors. That was when Sandra Whitmore appeared. She came through the revolving door from inside, moving fast, already scanning the lot for something to correct. Her eyes landed on the Bentley, then on Keanu. She stopped. She processed the gap between what the car implied and what the man in the gray hoodie looked like. She filled that gap with an assumption. She was already walking toward him before she had finished the thought. "Get your hands away from that car before I call security." The words landed like gravel hitting a window pane. Sharp, sudden, very public. Keanu turned. He did not flinch. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has seen before and decided not to be surprised by anymore. "This is my car, ma'am." She laughed. "Yours." She glanced around at the people near the steps, 2 other hotel guests, a bellhop, a woman in a blazer. Collecting witnesses, or what she imagined would be her audience. "A man like you does not drive a Bentley to this hotel. You probably took the bus. Step aside before I have you removed." He said it again calmly. So Sandra called security. 2 men came out, large, professional, expressionless. They positioned themselves beside Keanu without touching him, but close enough to make the statement. The lobby doors had slid open and a small cluster of guests had drifted near the entrance, watching. Sandra crossed her arms. "I will need to verify your booking. He told her his name. Keanu Reeves. He said it the same way he said everything, level unhurried, like a man who had made peace a long time ago with the fact that his name would not automatically open doors for him. She went to her tablet. She typed. She scrolled. She looked up. There is a reservation under Mercer, yes. But given the circumstances, I am going to need to see photo ID and a credit card before we can allow you to check in. Before we can allow you. Keanu reached into his hoodie pocket and produced his wallet. He handed her his driver's license. She looked at it for a moment, then at him, then back at the tablet. She handed it back without a word and began typing. Now here is what the people watching did not understand yet. The hotel Sandra Whitmore was currently representing, the property she was currently gatekeeping, the building whose standards she was currently enforcing. It did not belong to the management company she reported to. It did not belong to the parent group listed on her employment contract. Through 11 months of structured acquisition agreements and holding company filings, it belonged to the quiet man in the gray hoodie she had just accused of not being able to afford his own car. Let me hold that there for a moment, because in about 23 minutes, that fact was going to change everything. But first, it was going to get worse. Sandra typed something into her tablet. She looked up. I am going to need you to wait over there, Mr. Mercer. She pointed to a bench near the side entrance. Not the main lobby, the side entrance, the spot where maintenance staff signed in, the spot where deliveries were logged. He looked at the bench. He looked at her. He did not move toward the bench. Is there a problem with my reservation, he asked. It is a precautionary step, she said. Standard protocol. It is not standard protocol, he said, and we both know that. Her jaw tightened. Sir, I am asking you to cooperate, or I will ask you to leave the property. There it was. Leave the property. A man who owned the property being asked to leave it. Now here is where Keanu Reeves made the choice that defined the next 7 hours. He did not raise his voice. He did not show his cards. He put his wallet back in his pocket, turned slightly away from Sandra, pulled out his phone, and made one call. His attorney, a woman named Diane Cho, answered on the second ring. It is me. I am at the Harborview Grand. I need you here. Bring the acquisition documents, the full portfolio file, the corporate org chart. Yes, all of it. I will be here. He hung up. He looked at Sandra. I will wait, he said. And he sat down on the lobby bench, not the side entrance one, the main lobby one, the one with the view of the river through the glass wall. He crossed one leg over the other and looked at the water like he had all the time in the world. Because here is the thing about Keanu Reeves. He had learned something in 36 years of living in this country that most people spend their whole lives trying to unlearn. He had learned that his composure was his protection, that in a confrontation between a calm man and an agitated one, the calm man always wins the room, if the room is paying attention. And that lobby was paying attention. Sandra hovered. She whispered to one of the security men. She sent a text from her phone. She glanced at Keanu every 45 seconds. He did not look back at her. He read his emails and watched the river. Meanwhile, Marcus stood at the valet podium with his jaw set and his hands gripping the edge of the stand until the knuckles went pale. He had watched everything. He knew that car. He had parked that car himself when Keanu arrived. He had shaken the man's hand. He knew exactly what was happening and exactly what it meant. He also knew what speaking up had cost him in the past. 6 years ago, he had stepped in when a black family was being questioned in the lobby. He had politely told the manager on duty that the family had a confirmed reservation and had been guests before. He was written up for insubordination. The write-up sat in his file to this day. He had a daughter in her 2nd year of nursing school. He had insurance through this job. He had a retirement plan that was 8 months from vesting. He stood at the podium and burned quietly. And then he made his choice. He walked to the front desk and asked to speak to someone in management above Sandra Whitmore. The desk clerk, a young woman named Ashley, who had been watching the whole thing from behind the counter with increasingly wide eyes, told him quietly that the general manager was in a meeting upstairs. Marcus said, I know. Please call him down. Tell him it is urgent, please. Ashley picked up the phone. Upstairs, Diane Cho's black SUV was pulling into the hotel's front circle. She parked it herself, did not bother with valet, and stepped out in a charcoal suit and low heels with a leather briefcase under one arm. She was 41, Korean-American, and carried herself like someone who had walked into 1,000 difficult rooms and found the exits they did not tell you about. She came through the lobby doors, spotted Keanu immediately, walked to him, and sat down next to him on the bench without theatrics. He told her quietly what had happened. She nodded. She opened the briefcase on her knees and began setting documents in order. Sandra saw them. She walked over. "Ma'am, this is a guest services area, not a workspace." Diane looked up from her papers with the practiced patience of someone accustomed to being underestimated. She said nothing and returned to her documents. "Ma'am, I need you to take this elsewhere." Diane Cho looked up again. "My name is Diane Cho of Cho and Hartwell Legal Associates. I represent Meridian Capital and its principal partners. We are here on business relating to this property. I suggest you give us a moment." Sandra blinked. Meridian Coast Capital. She had heard that name somewhere. In a memo, maybe. In an email she had skimmed 3 months ago and marked as read without fully absorbing. The thread about the ownership restructuring. The one the general manager had told staff to acknowledge, but not discuss publicly. The thread about the new controlling interest. Sandra went pale, not visibly, not yet. But something shifted behind her eyes. The general manager, a man named Thomas Greer, came through the elevator doors at that moment. 53, gray at the temples, the kind of calm that comes from managing crises for 20 years. He had been briefed on his way down by Ashley, who had told him only that the valet supervisor said there was an incident involving a guest and Sandra. He walked toward the bench. He saw Diane Cho. He saw the documents. He saw Keanu Reeves stand up and hold out his hand. "Thomas," Keanu said. Thomas Greer shook his hand and said, "Mr. Mercer." He said it the way you say someone's name when you realize, in real time, that everything just became very different. Diane Cho laid the documents on the coffee table between the lobby chairs. She placed them one by one with the precision of someone who had done this before and intended to do it in front of witnesses. First, the vehicle registration, pearl white Bentley Continental. Registered owner Keanu Reeves. Second, the Meridian Coast Capital Corporate filing with the state of Oregon. Chief Executive Officer and majority shareholder, Keanu Reeves. Third, the acquisition agreement for the Harborview Grand Hotel, dated 11 months prior. Acquiring entity, Meridian Coast Capital. Controlling interest transferred, 72%. Fourth, the corporate organizational chart. At the top, one name, Keanu Reeves. Diane turned to look at Sandra Whitmore, and when she spoke, she made no effort to lower her voice. The lobby heard every word. "Ms. Whitmore, I want to make certain you understand the full picture. My client is not a suspicious man who wandered into this hotel. My client owns this hotel. The Bentley you accused him of not being able to afford is his. The lobby you are standing in is his. And every employee badge in this building was issued under a company that my client controls." She paused, "including yours." The lobby went very quiet, not the polite quiet of an upscale hotel. The suffocating quiet of 40 people holding their breath at exactly the same moment. Sandra's mouth opened. Her chin moved. No sound came out. One of the 2 security men who had stood beside Keanu turned and walked back toward the desk without being asked. The other looked at the floor. Marcus, still at the valet stand outside the glass doors, had watched the entire scene through the lobby window. When he saw Sandra's face change, he exhaled slowly. His hands stopped shaking. He straightened up and looked out at the river. Thomas Greer cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer, I want to personally apologize on behalf of this property. What happened this morning is not acceptable, and it will be addressed fully." Keanu nodded once. He picked up the documents from the table and handed them back to Diane. He looked at Sandra for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, "We will be in touch, Ms. Whitmore." He walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the 14th floor, and the doors closed behind him. Sandra stood in the middle of the lobby, her blazer, her tablet, her certainty, all of it still on her body, and yet she had never felt more exposed in her life. The fallout moved faster than Sandra Whitmore had anticipated. It always does when video exists. And this time, two videos existed. A couple from Sacramento had been sitting in the lobby waiting for their late checkout when Sandra confronted Keanu. The husband had started filming 30 seconds in. Steady hand, clear audio. You could hear every word. A man like you does not drive a Bentley to this hotel. You probably took the bus. He uploaded it at 1:47 p.m. under the caption, Director of Guest Experience, Harborview Grand, Portland. Watch what she tells this man in the lobby. By 4 p.m., the video had 140,000 views. By 9 p.m., it had crossed 800,000. By the following morning, it had passed 2 million, and the number was still climbing. A second video surfaced from a different angle, filmed by Ashley from behind the front desk on her personal phone during the document reveal. This one caught Diane Cho laying out the papers. It caught Thomas Greer's face changing. It caught the words "she works for him" whispered by a guest near the window, audible in the clip's final seconds. That clip was shorter, 41 seconds, but it was the one that went truly viral. It was shared in 12 countries. It became the top trending clip on 3 separate platforms by Tuesday morning. The hashtag Harborview Grand started trending at 7 p.m. Monday. By Tuesday, it had been used in over 400,000 posts. Journalists called the hotel. They called Meridian Coast's contact email. They called Thomas Greer's cell phone, which he did not answer. They called Diane Cho's office, which released a single statement that read, Our client's experience at the Harborview Grand on Monday morning speaks for itself. The documentation presented that day is a matter of public record. We have no further comment at this time. Sandra posted a statement on her personal social media at 10:23 p.m. Monday. She called the incident a miscommunication. She said she had been acting in the interest of guest security and had no information at the time to identify Mr. Mercer as an owner. She said she would not apologize for doing her job. Nobody bought it. The comment section became a searchable record of every word she had said in both videos, transcribed and time-stamped. Diane Cho had already begun the formal work. By Tuesday morning, she had submitted a request for the hotel's internal complaint records for the prior 3 years. What she found during the review confirmed what Marcus could have told her without any paperwork at all. Sandra Whitmore had filed 4 internal incident reports involving guests of color in the past 26 months. The first, 18 months prior, involved a black couple named the Walkers, who had arrived for their anniversary weekend in a new Cadillac Escalade. Sandra had flagged them at check-in as possibly presenting fraudulent booking confirmation and had requested that security verify their identification before allowing them access to their room. Their booking was confirmed. Their payment had cleared 5 days earlier. They were walked to their room flanked by a security guard. They checked out the next morning and left a review that the hotel's customer service team had flagged as sensitive and routed away from the public response queue. Translation: buried. The second incident involved a Latina woman named Rosa Espinoza, who had arrived to photograph a corporate event in the hotel's ballroom. She held a valid vendor contract, a signed event confirmation, and a laminated press credential from the event organizer. Sandra had her escorted from the property for failing to use the vendor entrance, a rule that was not in the vendor contract and had not been communicated to Rosa or her agency. Rosa lost the job. She lost 2 subsequent referrals from the same corporate client. She had written to the hotel 3 times. She never received a reply. The third and fourth incidents followed similar patterns. Each involved a person of color. Each involved Sandra acting with certainty that the person did not belong. Each was filed, processed, and never investigated. When the investigative piece ran in the Portland Tribune on Thursday, it was the lead story. The journalist had spoken to 3 of the 4 individuals. She had Rosa Espinosa's documentation. She had the Walker family's check-in log and their buried review. She had the internal complaint filings pulled from the records request. The piece ran under the headline, Pattern of Exclusion at Portland Luxury Hotel Predates Viral Incident. By Friday morning, that piece had been cited in 37 national articles and picked up by 2 broadcast networks. Keanu Reeves issued no public statement. He gave no interviews. Through Diane Cho's office, he communicated only this: the experiences described in recent reporting are consistent with a culture of exclusion that will not be permitted to continue under current ownership. Specific personnel actions and structural reforms are underway. Monday of the following week, Keanu called an all-hands meeting of the Harborview Grand's leadership team. He attended by video. He did not raise his voice. He spoke for 11 minutes. He said that effective immediately, Sandra Whitmore was terminated for cause, with no severance and no letter of recommendation from the property. He said that the hotel's guest security protocol, specifically the discretionary ID verification policy that Sandra had applied selectively, was suspended pending a full audit. He said that the complaint suppression queue that had been routing negative reviews to an internal archive instead of the public response system was to be dismantled within 48 hours. He said that every guest of color who had been subjected to a documented incident under Sandra's tenure would be contacted personally with a formal apology and offered a complimentary stay. He ended by saying that Marcus, the valet supervisor who had attempted to intervene on behalf of a guest at professional risk, would receive a promotion to guest relations manager, effective that pay period, with a corresponding increase in compensation. He ended the call. The meeting lasted 13 minutes total. Sandra received her termination papers by courier that afternoon. She signed for the envelope at her front door at 3:31 p.m. She read the letter at her kitchen table. The words "no severance" and "effective" immediately sat on the page like two stones. She set the letter down. She looked at the wall. She had spent 7 years at that hotel. 7 years of promotions and performance reviews and social committee dinners, and believing absolutely that the ground beneath her was solid. It was not. Thomas Greer was retained with a formal written warning and a performance plan. The audit of his leadership over the prior 2 years would determine next steps. He cooperated fully. He provided documentation of every complaint file that had passed through his office and of the 3 he had been aware of that were suppressed. His cooperation did not save his job entirely, but it saved his reference. The Portland Police Bureau opened a review of the incident at the request of a city council member who had been tagged in the original video 47,000 times. The review concluded that no criminal activity had occurred, but formally noted that the incident represented an example of racialized assumption, leading to a citizen being subjected to unjustified suspicion in a public-facing commercial space. The language was careful. Civil rights organizations said it was not careful enough and called for stronger accountability standards in commercial guest service protocols statewide. A bill was introduced in the Oregon legislature within 90 days. 6 months after that Monday morning in the Harborview Grand lobby, the hotel looked almost the same from the outside. The glass still caught the river light. The Michelin-starred restaurant still had a full reservation book. The rooftop bar still filled up by 8 on Friday nights, but inside, almost everything had shifted. The new director of guest experience was a woman named Patricia Dunmore, 44, black, 20 years in luxury hospitality, previously passed over for a similar role at a different property for reasons that were never formally explained. She redesigned the welcome protocol from the lobby floor up. Every guest was greeted identically. Every check-in followed the same documented steps regardless of appearance or a vehicle or attire. Guest complaints were routed to a public log, reviewed weekly, and responded to on record. Staff were trained quarterly on inclusive hospitality practices by an external firm that Keanu had hired on a permanent contract. The hotel's public rating climbed from 4.1 to 4.6 within the first 4 months. The comments cited warmth, professionalism, and a feeling of being genuinely welcomed. These were the same words that had been conspicuously absent from reviews submitted during the previous 3 years. Marcus came to work the first Monday after his promotion in the same dark vest he had worn every attaché for 11 years. He had an office now, small, with a window that faced the front circle. He could see the valet stand from his desk. He spent the first hour of that day writing a staff memo about the difference between hospitality as a job and hospitality as a practice. He had never written a memo before. He sat there for 40 minutes getting the words right. When he was done, he printed it and pinned it on the bulletin board in the break room. Nobody took it down. Keanu came back to the Harborview Grand on a Saturday 3 months later. He arrived in the Bentley. Marcus took his keys. They shook hands the way two people shake hands when something real has passed between them. Keanu had the grilled halibut at the second-floor restaurant. He read for an hour. He tipped 30%. He left without speaking to anyone about his ownership of the building. On his way out, he stopped at the community board near the lobby entrance. A new installation that listed local artists, nonprofits, and upcoming events with connections to the hotel's neighborhood programming. He read it for 2 minutes. He nodded at something he saw. He walked out through the glass doors into the afternoon light. The Bentley was waiting at the top of the valet circle, pearl white and immaculate, engine running. Marcus held the door. Keanu got in. He watched the hotel in the rearview mirror as he pulled slowly down the drive. Same building, different temperature. On the wall of the hotel's new community meeting room, a space that Keanu had funded and that hosted monthly open events for Portland residents, there was a single framed sentence. White text on a dark background. No signature, no attribution, just the words. The way you treat someone who cannot do anything for you is who you actually are. Keanu had chosen it himself and never told anyone why. 2 months after the incident, on a quiet Sunday morning, Keanu drove south from Portland. Not toward anything. Away from everything for a few hours. He pulled off the highway into a neighborhood in Tacoma that still smelled like cut grass and dryer sheets on warm afternoons. He parked in front of a small house with a garden that someone tended with the specific devotion of a person who has very little space, but makes something beautiful from it anyway. Gloria Mercer was on the porch, 73, a cardigan in August because she was always cold now. A glass of sweet tea with more ice than tea. A radio playing softly through the screen door, something from the 70s, something with horns and a slow groove that felt like a Sunday should feel. He sat in the wicker chair next to her. They were quiet for a long time. The garden moved slightly in the breeze. She spoke first. "I saw the video," she said. He said nothing. "You stayed calm," she said. He nodded. She looked at her garden. "You know what I thought about when I saw it? I thought about the night before you left for college. You were sitting right there, in that chair. You were scared. You did not say you were scared, but I knew. I told you. The world is going to look at you and decide what you are before you open your mouth. You cannot control what people decide. You can only control what you show them next." He sat with that for a moment. "That is what I did, Mama." She nodded slowly. They were quiet again. A car passed on the street. A dog barked somewhere. The radio shifted to a slower song, something with a cello underneath, something patient. He thought about Marcus standing at the valet podium with shaking hands. He thought about Rosa Espinosa standing outside the hotel with her camera equipment, escorted off jobs she had been hired to do. He thought about the Walkers eating their anniversary breakfast alone in their room because the dining room felt too risky after the evening they had had. He thought about all the people whose moments were never filmed, whose incidents were never investigated, who had no attorney and no acquisition documents, and no Bentley to drive away in when it was over. He thought about what justice requires and what it costs and who usually pays for it. So let me leave you with this. Keanu Reeves won that day because the truth was on his side, and he had the resources to make the truth visible. He had a lawyer, he had documents, he had a company, he had the composure of a man who had spent 36 years learning that the world would underestimate him, and had decided, long ago, to use that. His silence was not weakness, it was architecture. He built something inside it. But here is the honest question underneath this story. If Keanu Reeves had arrived in a used sedan and a hoodie and owned nothing but his own dignity, if Marcus had spoken up and still been dismissed, if there had been no video, no attorney, no acquisition documents, if the truth had still been true but there had been nothing to amplify it, would any of this have happened the same way? Would anyone have listened? Would Sandra Whitmore have lost her job or her certainty? You already know the answer. I think you have known it for a long time. The truth does not change based on who is telling it or what they own. But who gets believed when they tell it, that changes everything. And until it does not, until the man in the gray hoodie and the man in the blazer are treated as equally worth listening to, the work is not finished. Not even close. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are still here with me after all of that, you already know what I am going to say next. Subscribe, because I have another one coming that will stay with you. I promise you that. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes only. All characters, names, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person, living or dead, or any actual establishment. Any resemblance to real persons, organizations, or events is purely coincidental. This content is intended to explore themes of human dignity, workplace ethics, and social justice through narrative storytelling. It does not make factual claims about any individual, company, or institution.